Hey guys, this is Rump, and today I'd like to talk about a book that is really helping me to make better decisions. The book is called The Six Thinking Hats by Edward de Bono, and in short, the idea is to have a much more structured approach to discussions and decision makings than we typically tend to have. And imagine a setup where you're trying to decide with someone whether you should buy let's say a new domain for your website. And some person might say, oh, if we buy this domain, it's going to really create a great brand for us and we're going to have all these benefits. And the other person is saying, well, but it doesn't really work into our budget, right? And then they argue back and forth about the benefits versus the cons and the price and so forth. Versus a more structured approach would be to first establish all the facts, the price of the domain, the availability of the domain, the availability of other domains and so forth. Then look for all the potential benefits by order of buying the domain. And then maybe look at all the potential downsides of the purchasing this domain. And then maybe look at other creative solutions that could potentially solve the same problem. And then coming to a conclusion based on all the facts and all the data, right? And so the idea of the Six Thinking Hats is to create a very playful way with which we can make these discussions much more fun and productive, save time and so forth. So quick overview over the six hats, just so you know what we're talking about. So we have the white hat, which is concerned with informations and facts. Its opposite counterpart is the red hat, which is concerned with emotions and feelings, things that do not have to be fact-based. Then we have the black hat, which is concerned with caution, things that could go wrong. Its opposite counterpart is the yellow hat, which is concerned with positivity, with ways of accomplishing things. Then we have the green hat, which is concerned with creative, new, novel approaches to solving problems. And then we have finally the blue hat, which is sort of the meta hat, the organizing hat, the hat that organizes the other hats and keeps discussions focused and summarizes things at the end. So today in this video, I'd like you to learn three things. Number one, what are the benefits of using the six thinking hats? Number two, a bit more overview over the six thinking hats themselves. And number three, how you can actually apply the six thinking hats in your own life starting today. So now let's look at some of the benefits of using the six thinking hats. First off, I'd like to point out that I believe the best thinking tools are the ones that both work very effectively, but also are easy to teach, to learn, to remember, and to actually apply. And I believe the six thinking hats were designed with those ends in mind specifically, and thus I believe they work really, really well over the long run. So on top of that, let's look at the four main benefits that Edward de Bono highlights as the main benefits for using the six thinking hats. Number one, he says it's effectiveness, because we can now all wear the same hat. In other words, use the same thinking mode at the same time. It sort of makes it much less likely that we argue about irrelevant subpoints, but we're all looking at a specific issue with the same lens, trying to find all the benefits and all the dangers, and instead of going back and forth arguing benefits versus dangers, all in a sort of mumbled up way. The second thing is that it removes ego. So now instead of trying to have your idea win or to destroy someone else's idea, you can actually wear a thinking mode, a hat, and then you can try to be really good at wearing that hat. But that should be then independent of what idea is at hand. It's just about finding, performing really good with a specific thinking mode. The third thing is it allows you to look at things one thing at a time. It's much easier to juggle one ball instead of six balls. And that's where the six thinking hats are really useful, because you know which thinking mode you're in a sort of playful way, and then you can just try to perform with that hat really well and just have that like one lens on the problem. You don't need to juggle facts, positive things, and negative things all in a sort of mixed up way. And the fourth thing is that through all these benefits, it simply saves you time, because you can be much more goal-directed if you know from the get-go what thinking hat, what thinking mode is asked of you. And over time, you'll see that you can make decisions much better and faster. So now let's have a bit of an overview over the six thinking hats, so you have a bit more context around the ways you can use them and the power that is behind them. So the first one is the white hat. The white hat is concerned with information and facts. So under the white hat, you could say, in the last election, 230,000 people turned out to vote. Or you could say, I spoke with Mr. Jones and he told me that last year 230,000 people turned out to vote. Now, both of these are facts, right? 230,000 people have voted. This is something you can check or have checked. Or maybe you haven't checked it and you don't know for sure, but you have spoken with Mr. Jones and he told you this information. So both of these are permissible under the white hat. And in essence, the white hat is concerned with what information do we have and what information do we still need. And so the white hat can be really useful at the beginning of a discussion that then can be inputs for the further hats as we're trying to deal with more uncertainty. The white hat is all about establishing as much certainty as seems useful for making the decision. Its opposite counterpart is the red hat, which is concerned with emotions and feelings and intuitions. So under the red hat, I can say things that you do not have to prove, right? I could simply say something like, I do not like him and I do not want to make business and I do not want to do business with this person. Or wearing my red hat, I think this is a terrible deal, right? And so it's a very, very important hat because it allows things that are often unspoken that then cloud decision making, and people start to bring forth facts when really they have a pent-up emotion that they're trying to release. So the red hat allows you to release that emotion, to put it down on the table, things that are here anyway, and then you can sort of be more deliberate with the other thinking hats if you know that there's a space in which you can release sort of your fears and doubts about certain things. And the red hat, we'll see it a bit later, but it's a very useful and powerful hat that can be used throughout the discussions to sort of get people's intuitions about certain things. It's a very important hat, as is the white hat, of course. Then the next hat we'll look at is the black hat. The black hat is all about danger, caution, things that could go wrong. Now, an important difference between a black hat and the red hat is that with a black hat, you have to have an explanation for why you bring something up. So with the red hat, you don't have to do this, but with a black hat, you could say, for example, I've studied this area extensively. I've spoken with a dozen people in this area, and they've all told me that they think CO2 emissions will keep rising over the next 12 to 24 months. So the black hat is being cautious, but based on facts and information that you've collected somewhere else. Now, the next hat is the yellow hat. The yellow hat is the opposite of the black hat, and it's all about trying to find things that are positive about a certain outcome, a decision, or about ways to do things, right? So under the yellow hat, you might say things like, if we go through with this plan, I could see how our employees are going to be more energized. We could see how we can get, I see that it could generate positive PR for us. And overall, I just think it will boost morale, both within and without, outside of the company, and the perception of our company will increase. So the yellow hat can also be used to find solutions, right? Somebody would say, well, how could we possibly get into the newspaper? And then you might say, well, we could write a list of journalists down that have written about us before. We could hold a press conference. We could take this journalist out for dinner, and so forth. It's a very practical hat, and it's just saying it's not necessarily the most creative hat that'll come later. It's both about creating ways to accomplish things and about seeing value in potential positive outcomes. A very, very powerful and useful hat that we're sort of underusing most of the time. Many of us are tending to use a lot of black hat because we're wired sort of from genetics and from evolution to sort of be very, very cautious most of the time. So the yellow hat can be especially powerful for people who tend to have this more sort of cautious view in the world, and it gives them a space to sort of live themselves out and see positive things and things that happen around. Now, the fifth hat is the green hat. The green hat is kind of a hard to grasp hat because it is giving us a new thinking mode that we don't often use. It's about being as creative as possible, and it's about triggering creativity through provocation mostly. And Edward de Bono has written a whole book on lateral thinking, which is sort of what he uses in and with the green hat. So, the green hat, you could, crazy examples, you could say, you could provoke something and say, bicycle Poe winning the election, right? Two things that seemingly have nothing to do with each other, but then you just try to see what it does with your brain. How could bicycles help us win the election? Could we somehow, get bike to voters and then tell them they should vote for us, or could we auction off bikes to raise money for an election? Just like it triggers new ways of thinking that weren't obvious with our traditional thinking modes. It's a very, very powerful hat. Requires training, but if you can use it, you might find very, very interesting and novel ideas. One example is that when they were coming up with, when they were trying to find solutions to crime in neighborhoods, apparently they used something like lateral thinking to, somebody provoked and said, what if everyone was a police officer, right? And I mean, that seems impractical, but it gets you thinking. And then the idea of neighborhood crime watch, right? Like neighbors walking around their neighborhood and looking out for suspicious activities, suddenly became an idea that became very feasible and has been implemented in the US, mostly quite successfully, and actually being able to reduce crime in lots of neighborhoods. And finally, we have the blue hat. The blue hat is all about control, about designing thinking, about thinking, and sort of just, for example, deciding which hats to use in which order, how long the hats should be used, focusing, steering discussions back to the main topics, summarizing things, monitoring things. So it's very much sort of the meta hat, metacognition, thinking about thinking, and is a very, very useful hat. And is the only hat that can that it makes sense to have like a single person be more responsible for, versus all the other hats. We all want to wear them at the same time, so we have the same lens on specific problems. So now let's talk about how you can use the 6 thinking hats. And there's like 2 major ways in which you can use the 6 thinking hats. And one is the single use. This is you're having a regular discussion with a colleague or group of colleagues, and just within the discussion, it pops up to you that you say, hey, I'd like to have your yellow thinking on this idea, Mary. Could you please tell me what you see when you wear the yellow hat, right? And then just for a brief moment, one person or several people can just wear the yellow hat for a minute or two, see all the positive things that could come from a particular decision, and then you can sort of move on. It can be very powerful to say, hey, John, just give me your red hat thinking on this new deal we're looking at, and just get someone's intuition very briefly. And it's triggering that sort of playful and deliberate mode of thinking. The person knows that when they're wearing this hat, they can just act in that manner with the red hat. They can just say what they're thinking or feeling without having to justify it. So it's a very, very powerful way to just get quick inputs from people in a very sort of playful way, trigger their deliberative thinking modes. And the other way is to have a bit more of a formal, more sequential use of the hats, right? If you have to make a big decision, typically the facilitator maybe is the leader, it could be the manager, or whoever's in charge of a particular decision at the end, could define how to use the hats beforehand, right? So they're going to think about what the task at hand is, and then they were going to think, well, first we should probably, with wearing the blue hat, the person could say, well, first let's establish all the facts with the white hat, then let's get everyone's feelings so they can clear the air, so let's wear the red hat, then let's look at all the potential solutions with the yellow hat, then let's check for all these solutions with the black hat, see if the green hat can find ways around things that the black hat has discovered, then use the yellow hat to assess the ideas, and the black hat again to assess the ideas, and then finally summarize it all with the blue hat again and see if we have a decision, right? So this is a more sort of controlled way of using the hats, and you sort of beforehand establish which hats are going to be in use for how long, and this can just really help you structure your meetings and make them a lot more productive. So now in the next couple of videos, we're going to look at each hat specifically and dig into more details and try to really wrap our head around which hat, what does it mean, how to best use it, with lots and lots of examples. So hope you've enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.